Welcome to Best in Class. My name is AJ Madden. There are leaders, and then there are people leaders turn to when the stakes rise and the world tilts. Today, we sit with a man who has shaped the thinking of presidents and the decision making of the world's most powerful CEOs, the founder of the world's first school for chief executives, and a trusted advisor to five US presidents. His counsel has guided icons like Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan and Satya Nadella, one of my favorite CEOs of Microsoft. And when Russia invaded Ukraine, it was his Yale team that orchestrated the historic withdrawal of over 1,000 multinational companies from Russia, reshaping the global business landscape in real time. Named one of the top 10 most influential business school professors on earth, a voice carried by the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Time, Fortune, and every major network in the country. Today, we're entering the mind of a strategist who has stood at the crossroads of power for a generation. This is Jeffrey Sonnenfeld. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, AJ. It's an honor to join you, and I appreciate your own work in the field. And it's the next book we'll have to co-author together.
Oh, it'd be an honor. It'd be I appreciate you saying that. I respect and admire you so much and all the great things you put out there, but also the positive impact you've made in everything that you touch. It takes a lot of courage and stamina and smarts to do what you do. So you're
I
definitely a role
appreciate that,
model.
AJ. We both grew up in an era where our convergent interests in this field of people, organizations, and strategy, sort of the human side of strategy, got a little overly groupy. Not that there's anything wrong with empowered work teams, but we went through a period of time, the whole re-engineering movement and stuff, where somehow the bosses were vilified. We have evil bosses, we have vain bosses, we have greedy bosses. There are thieves out there, but they're in every walk of life, whether or not it's the clergy, academia, public office, or corporate life. But there are lots of good people too, and 95% of them are great and trying to do a good job. We should root out the 5% that are problematic. But sometimes by focusing exclusively on the creative energy of teams, which is so important, we lose sight of the importance of significant individuals. That if you go to a town square or a village anywhere on the planet, you're probably not going to see a lot of statues to an audit committee or task force. You're going to see to bold thinking individuals, and that's where you and I come together is trying to take a look at where significant individuals make a difference. There was the Harvard economist that gets quoted a lot periodically in waves, Schumpeter, and the Schumpeter had was famous for creative destruction, where it was basically a celebration of the entrepreneur, which you and I love. We love entrepreneurs, and the focus that the founder of Airbnb had last year on the focus on, as he was calling it, founder mode. Well, that's great. However, if you can figure out a way that significant individuals can rebuild existing enterprises too, perhaps that's just as great, not just to destroy what was there, but that significant individuals have a huge impact. And thanks. I'm delighted to talk with you about how leaders can have a positive impact.
Oh, well said. What an optimistic view of, 5% have bad intentions, but 95% have good intentions, which has been exactly my experience in 2 decades. And there's no statues of committees and parks. So
Right.
you need someone who's smart, has high integrity, and the strength of personality and vision to get things done. You know, and that's who gets the statues.
No, it's exactly right. And the leadership styles differ, and that's what we turn to with this book. It was Jared Kushner's idea, his actually his President Trump's son-in-law, who said, at one of our CEO summits, and Jared's been active in many of them. We had Ivanka at the last one. Although our positions are strictly nonpartisan, I'll pull together people from the left, right, and center in corporate leadership and across sectors to take a look at different leadership styles. And he said that people don't understand my father-in-law. And he said, "You do, Jeff." He said that he's unorthodox. He isn't like other CEOs. Some things work and some things backfire. But it's important that his critics and his supporters understand what he's trying to do. And that's what we work on in the book.
Well, the book is very unique and special, and it's going to be a smash. I'm sure of that. And it's called Trump's 10 Commandments. Strategic Lessons from Trump Leadership from the Trump Leadership Toolbox. And it's really presented as a neutral analytical study of a leadership style rather than a political critique. And it's drawing from Jeffrey's decades of observations and interviews with those in Trump's circle. Now, my first question is about commandment number 10, which is Donald the Great. And great leaders often become larger than life characters. Think of Churchill, Jobs, Musk, or Trump. How much of leadership success is about the mythology of a leader that they create around themselves versus the actual decisions they make?
It's a very important component. I'd gotten to know Jimmy Carter very well, and of those list of five presidents, that was one that I worked with. Uh, Part of his problem was, uh, well, he is, of course, a very principled person, and many classified him as one of America's greatest ex-presidents, if not our greatest ex-president. But in office, the grandiosity and the symbolism of office, he didn't master by choice. He thought it was superficial. He thought it was trite. And yet, there is an inextricable, intertwined nature of the symbolism and the substance of leadership. Something that Ronald Reagan was masterful at, and FDR was very effective at, is understanding the symbols of leadership. Of course, Trump takes it to an extreme. We haven't seen such grandiosity before, but the way he rebrands everything around himself and things, and it can become a little excessive and problematic. Obviously, when the vanity starts to become narcissistic. So you've got where the borderline is difficult to manage, but Jimmy Carter, he was famous or infamous for a very downscale inauguration, for example. A friend of mine, A.D. Frazier, who was a very young financier from Atlanta at the time, was put in charge and told that we're carrying our own bags. We don't want a lot of fanfare. And that carried right on through the end of his administration, where he was criticized for what was called the malaise speech. He actually never used that term, but he was taking a look at hardships in the economy and in America at the time instead of giving a vision of greatness. And he was criticized for hiding in the Rose Garden, as it was called, for hiding himself in the White House during the Iran hostage crisis, instead of getting out there and giving an uplifting message and reinforcing confidence. But he just thought that the integrity was more important than a triumphant vision. Well, you need to set a triumphant vision. If it looks like to this point that you've asked, that the leader is just like the rest of us, which is what Carter wanted to convey, the common person, the common man sense of being a leader, then it's hard to believe that if they don't have a transcendent vision and view, that it makes us nervous that they have the same fears that we do, and they don't have a clear pathway out of it. So sometimes it's an illusion. Trump creates that illusion of knowing more than he does and than we do, and when it falls flat is the problem. So we can see that now we're not quite sure that, as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, for example, has given him a lot of warnings about the Straits of Hormuz being cut off, he had a belief that it's not going to be a problem. Well, it turns out it is a problem. And there are some ways where maybe we needed some contingency plans that he's putting together now with allies to unblock the Straits of Hormuz to get oil through, or to deal with shortages that we didn't build up the strategic oil reserves when oil was down at 50 to $60 a barrel, and now we're at twice that. Is that there are some precautions that could have been done, but it is something that's special about the person who has that grandiosity. Most entrepreneurs, whether or not it's Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg or others, have that sense that they're going to prevail against the odds. And in fact, this is what Sigmund Freud told us about these kinds of entrepreneurs, is that they do change society. He said society is changed by its discontented, the people who are never happy with the status quo and have an irrational sense that they can beat the odds. As we know, what is it? 85, 90% of restaurateurs fail. And it's true, the odds against most entrepreneurs in general are against them. But those who make it through, do change the world, but they're not most of us. And that sense of grandiosity, and I don't mean to bludgeon this carcass forever, but I'm so happy you opened with that chapter 10, which is the 10th of the Ten Commandments. It it speaks to what Alexander the Third of Macedonia did. Alexander the Third of Macedonia. Nobody ever called him Alexander the Great until he called himself that, and he and his mother created this whole false lineage to Odysseus and Achilles and these mythic heroes, and he associated himself with those mythic heroes that uplifts a population. Say his contemporaries, a challenging leader who didn't do that was say Cicero, who was very much of a man of the people, didn't provide that uplift. He was much more, impressive in that he was much more of a democratizing leader, and yet he was brought down by his own people. Whereas Alexander the Third, with this luster and this aura, people believed that he knew more than he did. The danger is when you get trapped by your own myth with that myth making, and that can be risky.
Hmm. Yeah, I like that you pointed out there's a line you walk up to narcissism or recklessness, in your myth if you're not careful. I'm a firm believer that leadership is part theater, for sure. Great leadership is part theater, and that confidence and optimism are a component of it, as well as vision. I love your examples of FDR and Reagan, confidence, optimism, and a vision. They used the myth and the theater, to get things done, important things done.
No, they did. FDR's, third term, he just said that if suggested, he won't nominate himself, and if nominated by others, he won't run, and if elected, he wouldn't serve, and all that. When in fact, he was orchestrating below the convention center in Chicago. He had huge loudspeakers chanting his name. And he also had municipal workers from Chicago run down the aisles, again, orchestrating his grassroots spontaneous renomination while he was professing humility on the surface. So it's the stagecraft is impressive, but it is a part of the job that some see as superficial, but it matters. And you set this up in your very first question. How important are the actual strategic decisions made versus that stagecraft? They're both important. People have to believe in the salesmanship of it. And Trump is magnificent at that. When it gets to excess is the problem. But boy, he can decide how to wipe out what all the weekend shows are going to talk about with the wave of an arm or the kick of his foot. He'll kick the ball down the field, and everybody in the media will follow that.
Oh, well said. That's right. He controls the myth. I mean, he crafted it and he's learned it. The second commandment I had here, I mean, they're all great. All 10 are great. This one's about commandment number one, the hub and spokes model. And I was wondering which Fortune 500 CEO has come closest to running a company using Trump's hub and spokes power model, and did it work?
Well, his leadership style is imperfect. His genius is unquestioned, but you have to acknowledge that Elon Musk has that parallel. Steve Jobs did as well. There were other people who, after Steve Jobs passed away, we came to understand how magnificent a leader Tim Cook is, what Johnny Ives and other great talent in that organization had. But what Steve Jobs did and all the Apple events, the users conferences, and the big showcasing of new product introductions. It was all Steve Jobs. It was the stagecraft was all around him. Nobody else was mentioned, and it was a magnificent mystery of himself. And Elon Musk, it's the same way. Is that I bet that none of your viewers, listeners, could, off the top of their heads, name any of Elon Musk's lieutenants. He happens to have an extraordinary talented person running SpaceX, and that's the exception. She has a lot of autonomy. but that's the only one, and it's the uh, the but he has talented people. He's had very high turnover, but he still had deep trenches. But things are very Musk centric. Everything flows through him, and there's sort of an adhocracy around him. And it's been very much the same way with Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg. For a while, did have a very talented Sheryl Sandberg as his president, but it's all centralized back to Mark Zuckerberg again. So those would be three examples who come to mind that as entrepreneurs they run that way. Now, somebody who is running a Fortune 100 company for good or for bad that was not a startup, it was not an entrepreneur, it would be Jack Welch had that style, but there was some peril about it though too because is Welch was so central to everything that before Sarbanes-Oxley and other governance changes came about, he actually ran his board meetings saying, "I have to be on every committee." So he actually, before there were regulations against it, he'd serve on the audit and compensation committees even. And management's not supposed to be on those two committees these days. But he did. He said, if anybody's going to meet on this board of directors in any committee and is going to talk about what I'm doing, it's not going to be very helpful if I'm not there because only I know exactly what I'm doing. So that had sort of a chilling effect on discussions that they needed to raise about perhaps what was truly happening in GE Capital or there's some different parts of the business where we after the fact unraveled them to understand them differently than as he ran it. And that that can be problematic if it's too dependent on that leader. We need to know who else is in there, and that's really a challenge for good governance is to get to know deeper in the organization who's there.
Oh, that makes sense. And it's hard to pull off that micromanaging all the important things, which is
It
good.
is. At a startup period you have it, but that tribal model or maybe a hub with spokes coming off of it works in the early stages of creation where people are racing all around. So a founder has to be a marketing visionary one day and a technology inventor a next day and an operations execution soldier yet another day for zero defect creation and an HR peacemaker and rotate through these different jobs. But as the organization takes on strength, you start to need some functional expertise and some people who are dedicated to those areas. And then a later stage challenge is you start to create these functional silos and you worry about being responsive to local markets and products. So then you've got to integrate against those disciplines. But every stage of life of a business creates new leadership challenges happily. So we need leaders and not AI programs to that can run the business for us. Happily, we still do need leaders, but the leadership solution of each life stage creates a new challenge for the next life stage.
Oh, well said. And that's when you go out and get coaches and trusted advisors like Jeffrey, to help you walk through these unique
And
challenges.
you, yes, actually,
Yeah.
as a matter
Oh,
of
thank
fact,
you.
you have led many businesses across sectors through these exact life stages, and I'm so glad I wrote this book before you did because you would have had a running start on it yourself.
Honored to hear that. It's special. I love it because it's so pragmatic and it's so prescriptive.
No, well, thanks. I mean, there are just various things that he does. There's something else which is a pathology, which is not a strength. It's a strength for him to survive, but it hampers his leadership effectiveness, and that's the divide and conquer approach. There's a very famous book written by Doris Kearns Goodwin called "The Team of Rivals" on Lincoln's cabinet, Abraham Lincoln's cabinet, President Lincoln. Trump takes that though to an extreme. It worked effectively for Lincoln because he could tap into rival constituencies and hold each one at bay, but also tap in the knowledge and the expertise of each. In Trump 1.0, Trump had more of that in terms of the expertise he needed and people who could say no to him and he could learn from them. In Trump 2.0, they're too sycophantic, ass kissing. They're too tied in with a filial piety back to him. So they don't always give him the information that he needs in a timely way to challenge one another. That's become problematic, as we saw in Homeland Security, where he's had to make a change. We have some problems in the Department of Defense, Department of War right now, where we need some alternative points of view. and of course in health and human services under my old classmate, RFK Jr. They need some different points of view, and too much of the same mindset hurts him as a leader. But he doesn't want that right now, and it's just a shame. He didn't like NAFTA, didn't like NATO, even USMCA, which is his own creation. He tries to get Canada and Mexico to fight with each other, or try to erode the unity of the EU by getting Germany and the UK, or Germany and France and in the EU to fight with each other. And that right now he's asking for help in uh, in the Persian Gulf and the Straits of Hormuz to assure good guidance. He wants allies to support him, but he's attacked those allies as he did with threats over Greenland to seize it either militarily or through economic sanctions and things, and a lot of insults and barbs directed at NATO. He did drive them to increase more than double their contribution to NATO's support. That since the Marshall Plan was created, there was unfair burden sharing, and President Trump is right that the U.S. was carrying too much of the burden, even though it was advantageous to us to have a healthy uh, EU without fear of invasion from Russia. And we see what's happening in Ukraine, which is not a NATO member. So that's what's led Sweden and Finland to quickly join NATO, and the Baltic nations and Poland very much afraid, but they are NATO members. They have that mutual defense pact. But for Trump to attack it, erodes it. But he has managed to drive them up to pay a little bit more of their own self defense budget is built into it now is remarkable. I think Spain might be the one country which is not fully funding at I think perhaps it's the 5% level of their GDP where they need it to be, but but you can go too far attacking our allies, and that's what he's done right now. So he doesn't have a reservoir of goodwill to draw on. They're very skeptical of him because of some of it is the insults and some of it is the threats, and that can be a problem by driving a wedge. But that's the same thing with the business roundtable, the business community. He likes to divide and conquer. So he's taken on, as you mentioned, Jamie Dimon of J.P. Morgan, and Brian Moynihan of Bank of America, and the CEO Doug McMillon of Walmart, and the CEO of James Quinlan of Coca-Cola. I mean, these are iconic American companies. Harley Davidson CEO Matt Levatich was a very non-political CEO. His his customers lean the riders lean a little bit towards MAGA, the Harley riders, and his workers lean somewhat anti-MAGA. So he's just trying to run his company down the center. And then because of retaliatory trade barriers from the EU in response to Trump's trade and tariff issues towards the EU, he couldn't sell Harley Davidson's 100% made in the U.S. into the EU. So he had to shut down a factory in Kansas City, open one in Thailand, and ship the Thai product into the EU, even though 100% of the bikes sold in North America were made in North America. Trump told the North American buyers, don't buy Harley anymore because he's un-American. Oh my gosh, that how could you do that to Harley Davidson? Their very mascot is the bald eagle. It's America's symbol, and it's it so it's an iconic American company, Coca-Cola, or Walmart or Harley Davidson or whatever, and to attack these things. Harley Davidson is only 3% of the global motorcycle market. So by telling people not to buy it, you're hurting a major American company. All of his competitors or major competitors to Harley Davidson are Korea and Germany and Japan, and that's where he was driving the business towards, and that was really a problem. So the stock plummeted, and this poor guy lost his job. Matt Levatich got fired then, and the cautionary tale is leads CEOs to be fearful of speaking out, so they need collective action. But that would be the business roundtable. But he neutralizes them by picking them off one after another. I would hear from the CEOs of Lockheed and Lockheed Martin and Boeing as he was setting them up in a divide and conquer scheme, or Merck and Johnson and Johnson and Pfizer as he was setting them up against each other, General Motors versus Ford, and they were sending me emails. How do we deal with this friend of yours? He's just starting fights between us in public, over chocolate cake at Mar-a-Lago. Sometimes on strategically sensitive defense issues, they couldn't really answer him back, but that's an issue he likes. And we saw the same thing in The Apprentice, even though that divide and conquer scheme was actually the creation of Mark Burnett, the producer, as Trump exactly matched his style.
Hmm, interesting. Now, you've worked with some of the greatest CEOs for decades. What really separates those top 1% CEOs from the other 99% in terms of their mindset and habits? What separates the best from the rest?
Well, they're for the most part they're all quite intelligent, and we hope they all have high integrity. But it's a great question. There are five qualities that are different from what leadership scholars study for other levels of executive life, where leadership is important, but the charismatic leadership at the top, it is distinctive. One thing is there's a personal dynamism they exhibit, and Trump is very good at that. They are everywhere. They they need to be present. They travel out of 365 days a year. They're traveling two-thirds of that time at least on the road. That's a wearing life a lot of people can't live with. But another part of that personal dynamism is they use, while they're out there, they communicate through very evocative language. Now, Trump uses insults to cut through the attention economy, but there are other ways of doing it. But it does sometimes work for him. Those, Little Marco or Lying Ted or whatever it is, Sleepy Joe or is it Crooked Hillary? Somehow it registers with people and it's evocative. But again, there are other and perhaps better ways of doing it. But he's still that personal dynamism. They can electrify a group. A second dimension is they show empathy, concern for the well-being of those around them, the rank and file employees and things. Trump's not so good on that one. Empathy is not his strong suit. But Barack Obama, Bush 43, Bush 41, they were both very good at it. But again, Obama could go into a crisis or a tragedy like no one. And frankly, Joe Biden is at his best at a time of loss and hardship and show that kind of sympathy. Clinton was pretty good at it. Sometimes people thought it rang hollow when he could, I feel your pain. It seemed sometimes a little artificial, but he was pretty good at it. But Donald Trump's terrible at the empathy dimension. A third one has to do with an authenticity. Do they walk the talk? It's the moral dimension. That's where Trump often is so fluid. You don't get a sense he believes what he's quite saying is so that's a hard one, but the believability, it's the credibility, it's the and there's a moral dimension. A fourth one is to set high standards. And Trump is good at that. It's to stretch you beyond what you think is possible. And sometimes you can stretch people so far that they snap, but it is a big reach. It's to not be happy and satisfied with the status quo. And the fifth and last one is a difficult balancing act. It's prudent risk taking. That's where Trump has told me that he knows where his limits are. He told me once that he ran into uh, Bill Levitt, the guy who created Levittowns, these real estate developer after the Second World War. I'm on the board of Lennar, one of the country's premier home builders, but the really biggest one at the time was Levitt. He built homes for returning GIs after the Second World War and created towns all over America with somewhat cookie cutter type homes that were sometimes criticized, but they were affordable. It was sort of like the Henry Ford of the Model T of housing. And he sold his company to ITT and then he bought it back and it fell apart on him when he bought it back. He sold it to a conglomerate. And Trump told me he went to some sort of a club. I don't know if it was Studio 54 or whatever it was, but on the velvet robes on the stanchions, he saw this old man sitting on the curb. He'd been turned away from getting in there. He wasn't fancy enough to get in. Trump said, "Hey, can I help you?" And a flash of empathy that Trump says he had at that moment. And he looked up at him and he said, Donald, how's Fred? How's your dad? It's Bill Levitt. He goes, "Oh my God, Bill Levitt, what's happened to you?" And he told me that that was a clarion call for him, that he knows he pushes much harder than other people push, but he knows his limits. So, for example, he pushed really hard on Greenland and he created, tragically for the United States, a third polarity. Instead of things being the sphere of China and Russia and Iran and North Korea versus the US with Canada and the EU and the UK, is by pushing so hard and threatening on Greenland to try to seize it and not respecting the sovereign and independence of Greenland and its control and its relationship with Denmark and all the rest, is he wound up creating what Mark Carney of Canada started, which is the third polarity of unaligned nations. And when he saw that happening, he backed off as he saw what happened when the CEOs finally unified against him in Minneapolis. So you had Cargill and Medtronic and a lot of the major companies, Target, get together and say enough, that ICE has gone too far. It's too brutal. ICE and border control after the murder of two peaceful civilians and the paralyzing the city because Trump was making a show of force against a blue city in a blue state that he had some personal vindictiveness against. It was seen as out of control, and when he saw that the nation was rallying, the corporate community, the clergy, the street scenes, that he was losing it. He pivoted. We don't so, and he put Tom Homan back in to take control. Tom Homan, who I just had at a CEO conference and a conference of mayors last week in Washington to meet with 50 major city mayors, is Holman was taking, despite the tough guy image, was taking a much more unifying approach to immigration, and Trump has backed off of that and replaced the Secretary of Homeland Security, who was taking such a feisty, insulting, and violent approach. She's history, and that shows. And just like he's moved on from Greenland, he similarly tried to different explanations for why he went into Venezuela, which was probably because he wanted to change the subject of the discourse on the Epstein files and that whole scandal. He went into Venezuela, and first he said it was because of Russia and China. And well, it turns out Russia and China weren't doing anything that was any special military threat using Venezuela, and that was proven quickly. So then he moved on to say it was drug interdiction. But then when it surfaced that he had just pardoned a major drug dealer, the president of Honduras, former president of Honduras, named Hernandez. He pardoned the guy who'd already been extradited and had been indicted by a jury and then convicted by a jury and sentenced by a judge to 45 years in prison. And so the whole drug interdiction thing fell apart because there wasn't much coming into this country from Venezuela, but there is from China and Mexico. He then said, "What was the oil industry?" Well, all 90 top executives in the oil industry, oil exploration companies, and the servicing companies said, "No, we're not interested in Venezuelan oil." That fell apart on him. He moved away from that. Is that when he pushes and pushes and he hits a wall, he is not stupid. That's the thing that is really frustrating. Is some people think that he is because he might not win the spelling bee or the geography quiz in school, that he's stupid. He's maybe ignorant about certain things, but he is dumb as a fox. And when he sees he's losing, he's quite crafty. He moves on. So that's a too long an answer for you for that one, but you've asked great questions.
Oh, it's very interesting. And I think this is why this book stands out. It's so well researched, and Jeffrey's known Donald for decades, President Trump for decades. And it's from a personal perspective, but also from a very pragmatic leadership perspective. Uh, that's why this book is so rare and unique. And there's something that we can all take away from it. It's a bipartisan book. I mean, it's world leaders can learn from this for sure. CEOs can learn from this for sure. I think anyone who wants to understand what's going on will benefit tremendously from this book. Now, commandment number 8, the sleeper effect.
Thanks so
There's
much for that endorsement. I will have to put you on the next printing's jacket. I have all kinds of CEOs from Xerox to Disney to the Thomson Reuters to Procter and Gamble, the CEOs who would endorse it to great scholars, Jeff Pfeffer of Stanford, or people who worked with him, from Anthony Scaramucci to Michael Cohen, his former attorney, to the dean of constitutional law at Harvard, who's written a very nice endorsement. So yeah, but we'll have to add yours to it as well. That there is what people think is random or madness or impulsiveness. No, there's a pattern to it. That his choices are deliberate. They're strategically deliberate. You're asking
right.
about chapter 8, you said?
Yeah, sleeper effect, based on a study from Yale years ago, and it was just a study. Um, in the book, you describe Trump's use of repetition and the sleeper effect. Why does repeating a message with confidence make it increasingly believable over time?
It's it's known that when uh, psychologists and psychiatrists study a sociopath or a psychopath, they they have an unswerving confidence in their message that gets normal people to think, well, maybe we're wrong. They plant a little seed of self-doubt because they have no self-doubt. And this is not to suggest that President Trump is sociopathic or psychopathic, but this is a quality that creates self-doubt in others. And what was studied at Yale School of Mass Communications, it was kind of controversial in the 1950s. It was studying what worked in the 30s and 40s in Germany was uh, was the creation of what later got labeled as the sleeper effect. And what was controversial about it, a bit of a class consciousness to it. It suggested that sophisticated people who really dig down in the issues and study them, they need to hear both sides. So don't fight that. The sleeper effect says give them both sides, but plant some fatal flaws in one side. Two or three things that you see them, you can't make that choice, and you don't realize you've been manipulated. It's sort of like a the shell game of a street magician or something, or any kind of a illusionist. The setup has already created the mystique that you're going to get it wrong because of the design before whatever you see that's being manipulated in front of you. It's already been done. The coin already went into the other hand, and you're being distracted by this hand. This hand already had it minutes earlier. So is that's the sleeper effect for the sophisticated audience. You just do that and you drive them towards one side. For the less sophisticated audience that's too busy, doesn't care, is not interested in the issues, they just want to know what works. You tell them strictly the one side. And then for both groups, you just keep pounding then over and over again that one message so that eventually, however ludicrous it is, and even though the Republican governor of Ohio and the Republican mayor of the town uh, uh, where the accusations were listed to say that Haitian immigrants are eating their neighbors' pets. And the police chief, everybody's denying it, and all the neighbors are denying it's not true. Still, is that once Vice President Vance said it and President Trump jumped on it, but they keep repeating it over and over again, even though it gets discredited by all the valid sources. Those sources drop away. You keep repeating it enough, the memory curve on the research shows that the message lingers. So 100% of the population doesn't believe it, but 25% can start to believe something which is false information. That's very dangerous, but it can be very effective. And that's what Trump does is an artful use of that sleeper effect. He'll keep repeating, even though 64 courts, including courts dominated by judges that he appointed, his own attorney general, in his own chief of election security, and many others all told him that the elections of 2020 were fair and accurate, and nobody, no senator, no congressman, Republican or Democrats, thinks that they weren't properly elected or not elected on the same ticket. Somehow, it's just the top of the ticket. He's convinced a number of people that somehow it was just that one office where it was rigged. Well, how could, if the ballot was rigged, and by the way, there's nothing to support it, there's no foreign interference, all these audits again and again, and the ballot recounts and looking for bamboo inside ballots and all this other nonsense, and how Martians were involved, he'll still nonetheless convince a significant portion of the population that the largest, fairest elections in American history were somehow rigged because he lost. And that's he just keeps repeating that message.
It's very sad that this was used in the 1930s, for
Tragic.
awful, tragic purposes. And our mutual
It was
friend,
called the Big Lie back then when Joseph Goebbels, his head of the propaganda of the Third Reich, did that.
it's amazing. The bigger the lie, the more people believe, unfortunately. And our mutual friend, Jeffrey Pfeffer, and I have talked about this, how communication styles and power, the people with nefarious intentions, bad intentions, figure these things out faster because they seek reality and they study human nature better than people with good intentions. But people like yourself and Jeffrey Pfeffer want to put these communication tools into the hands of the good guys and the good people who want to make a positive difference in the world.
Yes, it's absolutely important to understand these tools. And too often, the critics of demagogues, critics of autocrats, uh, criticize them on the substance of what they're doing only, and they don't understand the style and the techniques they're using so that they can be used by good people too. In fact, the entire field, you'll be sorry you asked this, that Jeff Pfeffer and I have studied, it was of social psychology. Social psychology grew after the Second World War, a lot of it by Holocaust survivors as social scientists, and they were studying authoritarianism and things, and they wanted to figure out how to make sure we never had strong leaders again. And that's where the whole group consciousness came, the group dynamics school of social psychology, which was to look at leaderless groups, to look at how effective groups can function by empowering them, which is great. However, that's presuming that leaders have to be bad. You can have good leaders, and the pendulum that swung in Jeff Pfeffer in my field had swung too far away from understanding individual personality psychology and what the field of behavioral science and psychology, organizational behavior, and things, and the human side of strategy was approaching the personality side of it with what they called enlightened skepticism. We don't believe it really matters. It does matter. You know, these famous Milgram studies, which were also done at Yale, which were studies of obedience, where a person was told to inside an experimental setting to push a button, increasingly the voltage shocking another person in the study with them. If they're trying to teach them and they get the question wrong, they would shock the other person with stronger and stronger voltage until the other person being shocked would say, "Stop, stop, that's enough, let me out." But the boss, the experimenter, was telling the teacher subject to keep shocking. I know what I'm doing. And the the victim would slump over and collapse on the floor. And and then the teacher subject would say, "Wait, you killed him. Look what you made me do." And the guy would come out from behind a wall with a white lab jacket on and said, "I didn't make you do anything. You did it yourself." And he hadn't actually killed it. Exactly, the actual subject, other subject, the student subject, was actually part of the design. Was a counterfeit. Was an actor, and the only person who really was the subject was the teacher. And what they showed is that in 85% of the cases, a reasonable, normal person would be obedient to authority, would go too far. But and that's where social psychology is, and that's where a lot of the research was. But what I'm interested in, who's that 15% that said no, that I'm not going to do that? And we have to understand that part of the studies too, and nobody studies that. So that's where this is understanding how can you master the tools of leadership to do good. And that's why we need to understand these 10 commandments. They can be used or they can be abused.
Well said. Maybe lastly, in terms of the Ten Commandments, what are maybe one or two or a few that great CEOs and great US presidents have used, could use in the future, who have good intentions for society, for organizations, out of the Ten Commandments? What could CEOs and potential future US presidents use based on what you've taught in the book?
Well, one thing is the centralization of power in chapter one, where it's a hub and spokes coming off from it. Uh, Trump takes it too far. Uh, Bill Clinton, when he was operating at his best, because he had his weak moments, obviously too. is in the book The Agenda by Bob Woodward, the great Pulitzer Prize winning journalist from the Washington Post. He, in the book The Agenda, he referred to the Clinton White House as a bunch of school children running down the field, chasing after a soccer ball being kicked. And Woodward saw that as a criticism. And I asked Bill Clinton about that. And Clinton told me, no, he's accurate in describing what we're doing in the White House. That's not the whole government, but at the very top, you need a certain fluidity to travel to where the crises are. You can't be stuck in bureaucratic silos. So that's sort of an example where it was quite fluid. He was very hands-on. Clinton was, Jimmy Carter was, but Jimmy Carter was to too much excessive detail. And similarly Trump, that too much flows through them. But there's a right balance there in terms of a leader not being stuck up in a ceremonial office where they're too shielded. And they need to be close to the front lines. They need to be in touch with things. So that's one principle that can be adopted. Another one is the divide and conquer. Well, it's good to have differences of opinion around you, but don't use it to for them to kill each other off. Use it to inform you. So that's how, another principle there that has to be used the right way. And I think a controlling the agenda, something that Trump does, where Trump put out some racist caricatures of the Obamas as a cartoon, and we he did that intentionally, as the Venezuela strike or the Greenland. He wanted to change the agenda from talking about affordability, talking about inflation, talking about uninsured, millions uninsured in healthcare. Is He wants to change the agenda, and he can be very good at it. But he's the only person we know that will actually shoot themselves in the foot, uh, knowing that he doesn't want you to talk about the other foot. He actually will substitute bad news for other bad news, knowing he can come up with more things tomorrow. Is the idea of diversionary tactics can be helpful, how you set the agenda, how you reframe things, but you can find a way of doing it in the positive instead of looking at ways that are just substituting one negative with another negative. Is how about a positive vision? That is definitely what um, uh, the Great Society approach was that Johnson had. And of course, the Vietnam War dragged him down, but something which was uplifting for all was what LBJ was trying to do. And of course, the mission of in a time of crisis, what the New Deal represented uh, for for Roosevelt. How can we be look to the world being better? Something that worked very well, I think, which is an exception to all this, was the Abraham Accords, where that ran against the grain of Trump because it was, instead of divide and conquer, it was unifying the Arab Gulf nations to recognize, as several of these Arab leaders were telling me, because I worked with Jared on Trump's Abraham Accords on the launch of them, is that they're doing so much business with Israel below the table. The table's starting to fall over already, and that this next generation, the millennial generation of Arab leaders, is tired of the centuries of warfare already. We could create, with the resources here, we could create, this incredibly generative, brilliant hub of creation and ingenuity in the Mid East. Instead of being at war with each other for centuries and centuries, we could do better. And that was pretty exciting. And at Bahrain, he managed to launch this and get the United Arab Emirates and Morocco to build on some of the détente that was very successful that Egypt and Jordan had forged earlier, and to continue that momentum, and was just so painful before the Hamas invasion. Is that they're just 8 days away from getting the Saudis and the rest of the Mid East to sign in on these accords. But that's an example of keeping. And something else which he does is the uncertainty, which is people don't know where he is, and that's sometimes very beneficial. But anyhow, these are just some of the principles that come from the book.
Oh, they are excellent. Whether you're a CEO or a president. And do you know have you noticed anyone on the Republican side or the Democratic side who may be a future 2028 presidential candidate who has what I know from your work and also from today's interview, the vision, the myth, a good story, and the conviction and empathy that's notable to you. Has that, maybe we call it that it factor of the vision, the myth, self conviction, empathy. Anybody you've noticed in terms of 28?
It's a shame. There are people out there who would be good. And the degrading process of running for public office, the way it has gone right now into not just character insults and degradation, but also the personal violence and threats, that has led a lot of good people to not seek public office. But there's a Republican Senator, Bob Portman, who is very good on this front, who would never dive into it this way. There was Mark Warner, a former CEO, former governor of Virginia, and U.S. Senator, who also would be great. Bob Iger, the president of Disney, would be superb on this front. And there are just a number of people who really have these qualities. Mary Barra of General Motors, Indra Nooyi of formerly of PepsiCo, have transcendent vision. They're strong leaders, strong personalities, and but have a belief in goodness that have a kind of an uplifting quality. But I don't see those people in other sectors stepping in. It's hard to find, but we do hope that they can make it through the primary process that tends to drive them out. But we'll see who comes along. We have a lot of names that are being circulated right now, but the best names are people that are not in the political sphere, unless it was some of those two or three that I mentioned on the Democrat and Republican side. There's a David McCormick, who is a U.S. Senator from Pennsylvania on the Republican side, who's pretty good. And again, I think Mark Warner would be very good. J.B. Pritzker is quite visionary out of Illinois, and Governor Shapiro from Pennsylvania is particularly eloquent. Uh, but again, it's just the grinding mill of getting through our primaries that destroys a lot of talent. But good question.
Oh, interesting. Well said. There's hope. There's optimism. Uh, I hope whoever runs calls you for
Huh,
advice
thanks.
on
I
either
hope
side
so
of the
too, and,
aisle.
and we'll help them together. And AJ, thanks so much for your time and your interest and your wonderful endorsement.
Oh, you're welcome. It was an honor. Everyone, pick up the book when it comes out. The website's excellent. It is Trump's 10 or Trump10commandments.com. Book comes out here in a few weeks. Get it as soon as you can.
Oh yes, the first print run is going to be running out soon, so please do race out and get it as soon as you can, because you don't want to be caught waiting weeks for them to reprint copies again. I don't know how quickly the Simon and Schuster's printing presses are, but I know that it's the advance orders that will secure you. You can get it on in 2 weeks on the 31st of March.
Oh, well said. Get it as soon as you can. And lastly, one of my favorite quotes from Jeffrey: competence without character is dangerous. Character without competence is useless. So if you have good character, pick up the book and study Jeffrey's work to become a very competent CEO or leader in any arena. We need more leaders that have competence and character. And Jeff's work can help you get there. Thank you for the time. It's an honor.
Thank you so much. You're exactly right. Character, as Thomas More said in Man for All Seasons, is like having a liquid cupped in your hands. Once you separate the fingers, it's forever gone. And that's what this is all about, is about character. Thank you so much, AJ, and good luck to you too.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Looking forward to the next
Thanks.
conversation.
Oh, I look forward to it as well. Thanks.
Thanks. Take care.